Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. I spoke in the last video about how Rhulk would have to confront a great failure in his time and that failure would land him in a less prestigious position than out there in the universe, slaughtering the enemies of the Witness. The time for that video has come. Rhulk is the first disciple of the Witness and elevated himself to a point of dominance over his planet Lubrae. He is the last of his kind and one of the closest confidants of the Witness. And yet, strangely enough, the Witness seems to have punished him. What was his punishment? To be a mentor, and effectively to be restrained to a position where he was stuck and left abandoned within Savathun's throne world. His time within the throne world of the Witch Queen is documented in the lore of the Warlock armor for the Vow of the Disciple raid. In one of its entries, we see perhaps the reason why Rhulk believes he was not banished, not exiled, but perhaps reprimanded. Listen closely. We're going to hear a name in this lore entry that we've never heard before, but it's going to be the most important part of this entire story. She was a frog in my estimation. Small and colourful, but toxic to touch. In your infinite wisdom, you looked beyond the worm I brought you, to the least of the leeches that infested Fundament. Shaving thin my gift, you infected them with conquest, and now they see themselves as artisans of the final shape. My place is not to understand you, my witness, but to serve that final goal you see more clearly than I. But now, your gold leaf parasites call themselves gods and carve out their divine homes. And I am to watch the sniveling frog? Was this castigation? The toll I pay for my failure with the Aslid? You have cast me and my ego once more into the cold depths of an inconsequential world. I recall stepping into her realm, and her face twisted to betray restrained delight. She thought herself mistress of this domain you leased her. She did not, could not, appreciate the precarity of her situation. So sure of her dominion, she could not recognize her jailer, or that she lives within a prison formed from her own ego, one I will put to work for you, my witness. The capture of her race will flow out from this realm. Each self-satisfied smirk will forge a new link in their chains. Had I known then what my current quandary would be, I could have heeded my own insights on ego. Regardless, even in this predicament, I am unbowed. Did you catch that part in the middle? The part where Rhulk talks about his castigation, which, for those of you who don't know, basically means to be severely punished. This is just Rhulk's perspective, so it might not be the reason that he was punished and sent to Savathun's throne world. To that point, he might not even have been punished by the Witness at all, and this might simply be his misunderstanding of the Witness's plan. But assuming that Rhulk is correct, we can suddenly understand why he was left stranded within Savathun's throne world. If Rhulk's speculation is correct, then it's because of his failure with regards to the Aslid. But who or what is the Aslid? Well, it seems to be a significant part of Rhulk's story, considering that all of the lore of the Hunter armor is dedicated to them. Here's some context. The Aslid are a species that we've never met in Destiny, for much the same reason that we've never met an Ammonite or a Tai, or the Harmony, or one of the Ecumene. This is a civilization that was driven to extinction by the minions of the Witness. It is, in this instance, one that was driven to extinction by Rhulk. But as it turns out, if the Witness had had its way, they would not have gone extinct, and might instead have been found serving in its armies, or perhaps serving some other purpose. We're going to take a little dive into what happened by reading some of the Hunter's armor lore today. But first, I think it's fair to go ahead and give a little more context on Rhulk and where he is in this particular situation, as well as what the Aslid really were like. Rhulk is, at this point, a being so powerful that he is able to effectively slaughter thousands if he wished it, without even a care in the world. He is capable of commanding fleets of dark ships in order to decimate worlds, and he is fully committed to the Witness's cause even if he is not complete in his understanding of the reasons why it does what it does. It's in this context that he first finds and sees the Arslid, who are a fragile insectoid people living on an arid world. This species of insect-like beings could be easily crushed by Rulk or left in obscurity to fall and die within a few million years if they were simply left to their own devices. But crucially, they wouldn't have died because of themselves. They would not have wiped themselves out. It would simply have been entropy that would have killed them. Rulk could have killed the Arslid in a single stroke if it was desired, but for some reason, the Witness desired an intervention of a different nature, and so Rulk was tasked to the Arslid. We get a glimpse at this moment and the Witness's purpose, which still remains somewhat unclear in the first steps of Rulk's story with the Arslid, as told in the lore of the Hunter Raid Helmet from the Resonant Fury set. Void, bereft, there is a chasm where my fulfillment should live. Today you again gifted me purpose, my Witness. A rapturous day by the old pattern, my fingers knitting finality once more. But now this purpose is equivocal, serving not the glorious abyss. The race, the Arslid in their degenerate clicking dialect, have never known the enemy's luminous caress, will never know that caress. They are unnecessary, destined to die in a paltry million years, still orbiting the same blue-white star that gave them succor. Irrelevant. And yet, your presence shall raise no more concern than that of a speck of dust blown off course by a distant sun, and you shall bow this people to my service, just as I enlightened you. Your value shall be their value. I was born in irrelevance, and yet you cast me back down that well. I keep your sacred commandments, even this, closer and dearer than my own pulse. In your name I bring crushing embrace by flame and glaive, my Witness. Fleets of black to blot out suns and moons. The enemy flees, and I burn all trace of its passing. This is my supplication. But I castigate myself. Nothing is immaterial that is in your sight. My prayers offend, my Witness. And so here and now I tear them out. I shall learn to forge by night and whispers, and silence shall be your choir. So the Arslid were a peaceful people before Rulk intervened on their world, and he seems to recite, although in a somewhat strange paraphrased way, the instruction of the Witness to bend the Arslid to the Witness's will instead of destroying them with the typical massive fleets and incredible impending destruction that Rulk would normally bring. The way that Rulk described and recited the Witness's wish is strange, because he quotes the Witness, or seemingly quotes the Witness, and quotes it using the wrong pronoun. It sounds really odd, but the Witness always refers to itself as we, but Rulk here says, just as I enlightened you, instead of just as we enlightened you. Maybe this is a way of communicating something different, maybe this is something that tells us a little bit more, but keep an eye on this. It could have some strange meaning, because this is the first time we actually see the Witness refer to itself as I. Maybe again this is just Rulk poorly reciting it, and maybe the Witness said something slightly different. I'm not entirely sure here, but pronouns like this often designate something slightly different, and do have some significance on this front. It's also a way of us keeping track of who's actually speaking and perspectives, etc., so just keep that in mind. All of that being said, Rulk went ahead and instead of bearing down on the Arslid with the typical violence and destruction that one would expect, worked quietly to infiltrate the society of the Arslid and to spread the tenet of violence that the sword logic would demand amongst them. For 14 years, Rulk stalked the Arslid, testing them and giving them opportunities to present themselves as warriors filled with wrath and purpose, just like he was back on Lubrae. The Arslid, however, were not warriors. They cowered in fear and did not attack Rulk. Rulk would have been willing to kill them all, but of course, instead, his purpose was not one of immediate subjugation and death. Instead, it was one of liberation, as the Witness might put it. Liberation of this species from a bond of useless existence. Liberation so that they might join the Witness in spreading the doctrine of the sword logic and bringing the universe closer to the final shape. And so, Rulk did not annihilate all of the Aslid. Instead, Rulk went about and spread violence with them. Deaths were allowed to occur, but he did not kill all of the Aslid. He killed select Aslid in select ways that inspired violence within the species. He sowed distrust within them by killing various members of different tribes and always hiding his footsteps, it would seem, allowing the Aslid to lay the blame at their kin's feet, so that then they might begin the process of nation building. They would form into tribes, and then into nations. They would draw lines of territory, and would then form armies. With the tensions rising slowly but surely, the Aslid turned from a peace-loving people to a people that were ready to accept war as a means of survival. From here, Rulk would continue to spy on the world's population for champions of the darkness. One such Aslid was almost fitting for this role. Almost. I am become circumstance, my witness. The unseen whim of fate that shapes the lives of 100 of infants in the same temper of luxury and hardship that honed my infallible edge. Where their families lack, I gift them with prosperity, opportunity, and the elimination of obstacles. Where they know softness, I introduce suffering for which there is no salve, snatching away those who may carry them and nourish frailty. My salubrious hand imbues strength, but far more critically, it weans them on immaculateness. They are self-made, they tell themselves, and grow strong from their suffering. Should not all their kind be so capable? Is there, they conclude, any explanation for the failure that permeates their society beyond a sick sentiment for weakness? Their antennules quiver at the debility in their kind. Its stink disgusts them. The youngest of my brood, I named him Un, has taken his first life. Stoked on emotion, his craft is sloppy, the hand of a child. But I have removed the shoddy traces of his outburst and vanished those who might find fault with such a child. He shrinks now from the anonymous endowments I lay as laurels for his conquest. I have permitted too much softness for the offspring. And I am left to ponder. Did you so attentively hone me into your blade, my witness? Or did happenstance and my own tenacity ready a blade for you to draw? As a quick note, this is the ultimate theory of the darkness made manifest. We would call it the cruel and terrible ideology that leads from social Darwinism, and it's not something that you should ever think to practice here on Earth in real life. But here in Destiny terms, this is the retinue of the darkness. It is one that does not accept frailty of any kind, born of circumstance or choice. It is one that only tolerates the utmost of strength. And it is one that will snuff out any weakness, just as the Aslid saw in their own society and attempted to snuff out. Un would perhaps have been Rulk's champion in time, but I feel like Rulk here revealed the very nature of his own failure and the reason why a champion of the Aslid never eventually revealed itself. When Rulk himself was found out to be a problem within his tribe back on Lubrae because of the blood he had spilled and the ferocity with which he attacked the Stalkers back on Lubrae's surface, he was shunned and practically cast out. This same fate might also have happened to On, but Rulk spared him from that fate. In doing so, I think Rulk shepherded this would-be champion of the Aslid away from the path of the sword and into a more timid and questioning state, one that still held qualms for morality and understood that the actions that they had allowed themselves to commit were the ones of a monster who cared not for their fellow Aslid. Whilst others would inevitably rise to become a part of Rulk's subtle plan, Aoun fell out of favour as he was slowly riddled with doubt. Perhaps this is the moment at which the plans of the disciple began to fall apart. but unquestionably the moment at which they collapsed entirely came with the collapse of the civilization itself. Rulk's initial assessment was right. The Arslid would die out, but it would not be in a few million years due to entropy or the passing of time as they circumnavigated their own sun. It would be by their own hand. It would be the consumption of the sword logic that was demanded by blood. It would be Rulk's failure. I have failed you, my witness. I taught the Arslid to build a tower to heaven upon a foundation of sand. I hemmed for 10 long cycles over that final lesson in irrelevance, and in the end, my pupils exceeded my ability as a teacher. They tumbled. A sunset of atomic fire scrubs all but lichen from this arid globe. But Aun stands before me, last survivor of his pointless kind. While he proved death to the lessons I taught regarding his people's worth, he devoured all I taught him of tenacity, and made of it his core. He alone among his people saw the pattern in my killings, in the ascension of children whose backgrounds mirrored his own. My duty to you failed. My greatest flaw in my handicraft stands before me. And yet, I find myself burdened with pride. He levels a weapon on me, and it occurs to me that I never learned what they call their devices. It is as irrelevant as everything else that made up their culture. But he is the first to stand and face me. He dashes hate against me and breaks. He does not know my name, he does not know my purpose, and he demands, then implores, then begs. He prostrates himself on the floor, his carapace racking with convulsions, as if mourning milks the sorrow from his flesh. And I am weak, my witness. I whisper, I am Rulk. Devoid of context, it is as meaningless as any other aspect of his people's end. Something sacred within him dies, and he gazes up as I have gazed at you. And only now do I appreciate your lesson. Whatever purpose the witness had with the Arslid was lost in the clutches of Rulk's ineptitude. The sword logic is a fine line to raise a civilization by. Yes, it brings great advancement and at great speed, and yes, it does indeed promote strength, but it also promotes internal strife. One cannot rise to the top of a civilization without a champion clearly and immediately presenting themselves, and in the case of the Arslid, there was no one champion. As a result, they fell into ruin and destroyed themselves in nuclear fire. It's not clear what their purpose would have been, but it seems that the Arslid arose before the Hive did. Perhaps they were supposed to be what the Hive are now, a swarming and devouring people with a claim to some part of the Deep's power. Perhaps they might have been the Crusaders in the vanguard of the Deep's forces, carrying its banners before the arrival of the Black Fleet. But it is not clear. Now it may never be clear. Regardless, Rulk seems to believe that his failure here is what landed him in Savathun's throne world, with his pyramid ship grounded in the Disciples' Bog. And his role here is now as a guide for the fledgling Witch Queen, or at least, it was. What purpose Rulk served for Savathun in her days as an agent of the Witness is the story we'll be talking about next, as Rulk assisted the Witch Queen in her ascension to create her dark armies. We'll be talking about the foundation of the City of Darkness, and of the tools which the Witness brought to bear with Rulk's forces, allowing the Hive to grow their armies en masse. But that's all for now with this video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed, go ahead and do all the typical stuff. Leave a like and leave your thoughts down below. In particular, let me know if you want a playlist for all these raid lore videos. This series is getting rather long. I thought initially it was going to be around about 8 videos, and now I'm looking and realizing that we might be able to go for about 9 or 10, and that these videos will slightly filter into the further Witch Queen lore that allows us to really piece together Rulk's story in full. With all of that said though, do let me know what you think. because honestly, I'm not 100% sure. Maybe it's something that you guys would find interesting and useful. Maybe it's something that helps guide your acquisition of all this knowledge. If it is, again, let me know, comment section is open down below, but as per usual, know that your viewership, as always, is quite enough for me. And that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Per Audacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.